Look for them to air in the near future on Book TV on C-SPAN 2.
Are you going up on stage, or are we just going to start down there? Oh, checking out who's doing questions.
You want to recognize her? Sure. And then I'll just give you that. We'll try to end right.
Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. For those guests here in-house, we do ask that last courtesy check that our cell phones and our other noise-making devices have been muted as a courtesy to our speaker. Our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And, of course, we will post the program on the Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference following today's program. Hosting our event is Dr. James J. Carafano, who serves as Vice President of our Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. He is also our E.W. Richardson Fellow. He's a graduate of West Point and a 25-year veteran of the Army, serves as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, and has served as a visiting professor at the National Defense University. He serves on the Board of Trustees of the Marine Corps University Foundation and the advisory boards for the West Point Center of Oral History, the Hamilton Society, and Operation Renewed Hope. Please join me in welcoming Jim Carafano. Jim?
Well, thank you for coming to what should be really an extraordinary event. Pete's not only a great friend, but he defines the definition of a great American. Graduate of Princeton and Harvard. We won't hold that against him. He served in the U.S. Army, right?
Yes, indeed.
Which is another mark in his favor. Three combat tours, right?
3 tours.
Yeah, 3 tours, 2 Bronze Stars, combat infantryman badge, extraordinary career in the public sphere, including now working with Fox News. And so having put his life on the line, I'm not really sure what possessed him to write this, but I think in the arena is both courageous, dangerous, and certainly politically incorrect. That in the world in which we live, you would deem to write a book about who are we and who we should be. It just seems something that just seems quaint and old-fashioned and distasteful to address anymore. But for those of us who have kind of walked around the island in the Potomac and walked by the Roosevelt statue and seen some of their quotes and remember not just his legacy, but the legacy of people who thought, you know what, maybe this really does matter, that deciding who we are is kind of quintessential to being a republic and a democracy, that maybe there's not a better time for this book. And certainly I applaud Pete for taking it on and coming here today to share his thoughts. So Pete's going to talk, and then we'll take Q&A, and Pete will recognize his own questions, and we'll do that till the end of the hour. So when we get to Q&A, if you would wait for the microphone, if you'd raise your hand, wait for Pete to recognize you. And then you'd wait for the microphone so folks that are listening online can hear the question as well. And if you just state your name and affiliation, that'd be awesome. And then we'll do that, and we'll do because sometimes we start late here at Heritage, but we always end on time. So with that, please join me in welcoming the author of In the Arena.
Well, Jim, thank you very much. The Heritage Foundation, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I mean, you got the book early, you read it, you engaged with it. I appreciate that, and offered to host. I'm grateful for that. Thank you very much. This feels like a family reunion, basically, in this audience, and I thank all of you for being here. So many wonderful faces, people that I've known and worked with, and folks online. Thanks for sticking with us. First, I want to thank a bunch of people I want to thank, but my former colleagues here at Concerned Vets, which make up a big bulk of this audience. I'm grateful that you're here. I wrote this book from 4 to 8 a.m. In many mornings while running CVA, and it was what we did at CVA that was an inspiration for me. And I think you'll find in the pages of the book that it's a call to action that is exactly the call to action that is the organization. So it was always a pleasure to work with you. I appreciate the work you continue to do from Jay and Bill and Caroline and Sarah and Tal and Dan and Will and Sean and Amber and Emily and Kevin and Fred and even my brother Phil, who's in the front row here. I want to thank all of you, and of course, who was with us early on, Kate Pomeroy. Kate was also a inspiration for me to write this book. She told me, you got to write it, you need to write it, and I took her advice. I'm glad that I did. So, Kate, thanks for being here. I also want to thank my very good college buddy, Nat Hoops, who is here and is acknowledged as well in the book. This book literally would not have happened without Nat, without him teaching me how to think and write and argue in college and pulling me back from the brink of some absurd things that I put in the pages of publications. Nat was the content editor of the Princeton Tory, and for good reason. Nat, thank you for your help on this project. It truly would not have happened. And then so many other that are not here. My wife, our boys, Gunnar, Boone, and Rex, who I dedicate this book to. Yeah, I always get laughs out of that. Yeah, those are they're great names. They're good Southern names up in the North. My parents, my brother Nate, who is a man in the arena himself. And then I also always want to recognize David Bellavia, who is a very good friend of mine, who was a fellow traveler of Vets for Freedom, an author himself, and also encouraged this project from the beginning. To the book itself, when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay, I carried with me a quote in a black frame, durable black frame. I always hung it up wherever I was, and it was Teddy Roosevelt's "Man in the Arena" quote. A lot of you are familiar with it. If you open up the first page of the book, you'll see it. It's the quote. It's not the critic who counts. It's the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by blood and sweat and dust, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. It's a famous quote. Many of you have heard it. Many of you probably are motivated by it as well. This book aims to ask those questions of the American people today. This book is not about my life. I'm not audacious enough to believe that I should be writing a biography at the age of 35. I'm not a state senator from Illinois. This book is also not about Teddy Roosevelt. Of course, it channels his historic speech, but it's not about him. I'm not attempting to litigate his life. As a conservative, I am very aware of his progressive lurch and what he gave us in 1912 in the candidacy and presidency of Woodrow Wilson. To say that Teddy Roosevelt as an American failed while daring greatly is generous. So this book is not about me. It's not about Roosevelt or litigating where he is on the political spectrum. It is a call to action. It, to me, is meant to inspire, motivate, and remind Americans of every generation what makes America special and that it is worth fighting for. And some of us carried a rifle, and many in this generation still do, but you don't have to carry a rifle to be in the arena. And it's our job to instill in every generation the principles that perpetuate what is, as you all here know, an experiment in human freedom. You see, if the 21st century isn't an American century, then the 21st century will not be a free century. It's just a fact. You look around in the world today, there are threats loom, ideologies around the world are quite different than ours. And a quote, something I put in the book throughout, is the phrase, history is not over. History is never over. And all we have to do is look to Western Europe today to realize that when you decide to gut your military to pay for your welfare state and you forget who you are, you have a tendency to end up riding the wave of history as opposed to shaping it. See, if getting off to a good start is important, then no one is more responsible for the 20th century being an American century than Teddy Roosevelt. It's a guy who charged up San Juan Hill in 1898, who sent the Great White Fleet around the world in 1907, and who really was the chief agitator for American involvement in World War I. If you remember, Woodrow Wilson declared he wanted peace without victory, which would be, I think, quite difficult and would be a very different looking peace than what we have today. In many ways, the 20th century was an American century on the back of Teddy Roosevelt. Why then, as I think about it, when I read the entire Roosevelt speech, that's when I really woke up to the power of the quote. The quote itself is powerful. The quote itself is motivating. But it is in some ways there's no value assertion in the quote. It's being in the arena, right? But what is the arena? Where is the arena? What does it mean? And what I write in the book is it's not your arena or my arena or a you do you argument. There is the arena for this exceptional American experiment that was gifted to us 240 years ago and has to be perpetuated in every single generation. We all know the quote, the Reagan quote, we're never more than one generation away from extinction. You have to fight for it in every generation. It doesn't get passed to the next generation in the bloodstream. A beautiful quote, but a stark reminder and a more difficult reality on a daily basis. You see, the quote, man in the arena, is just one quote of the larger speech called Citizenship in a Republic. And Roosevelt gave it in 1910 in front of 3,000 French elites at the University of Paris, the Sorbonne. When I read the speech for the first time, after just looking at the quote and never really thinking of the context, I was blown away. In many ways, it was sort of un-PC before there was PC. It to me struck me as the roadmap of what we need in America today in order to restore our republic. Why should I stand up and declare what I think the direction of America should be, when instead I could channel a fantastic speech, a historic speech that has timeless resonance today and reminds us of the very ingredients of republics that are required in every generation, no matter what, no matter whether or not we have Twitter or Facebook or any other number of modern developments, the ingredients, the basic seeds of a republic are the same. He posits a very simple thesis. He says, the average citizen must be a good citizen if great republics are to succeed. Think about that. The average citizen must be a good citizen if great republics are to succeed. Not great rulers or even great citizens, necessarily heroic citizens in every moment. Good citizens that on a daily basis, in a gritty way, in a personal way, understand what it takes to keep and make America the greatest country in the world. You see, good citizens are the only antidote to big government. So the smaller and more selfish the citizens, the larger and more unchecked government becomes. And as history shows us, good citizens who understand why America is exceptional and special, they are the thin line between freedom and tyranny. They're the ones who understand that our American experiment truly is exceptional. Not because we're proud or boastful, but because we understand that this American experiment, when it was first started, was just that. An experiment. In fact, Europe sort of laughed at us and said a piece of paper, a constitution, is what's going to stand between you and a tyrant. You're gonna hand over power peacefully. There was this sense that it just wasn't possible. Yet our founders reminded us that our rights come from a creator and not from government. They understood a balance of power which checked the fallen nature of humans, our pride, our tyranny, the tendency toward tyranny and ambition. They understood freedom of religion as opposed to freedom from religion. They understood amendments like the first and the second are indispensable to free peoples. The ability to articulate speech and ideas across the spectrum, which Roosevelt talks about powerfully in the speech. True tolerance is tolerating very dissenting and different opinions. That's tolerance. And the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms and protect yourself. They also understand we're a country of laws, not men. If men were angels, we wouldn't need these types of arrangements. So he talks about good citizens and good patriots in the speech. Good citizens at home and good patriots in the world. And that's really the breakdown of the book. And it's intentionally in that order. Because I talk a lot about what I talk about on Fox and elsewhere is foreign policy and the military and national security. And you look at the world today and there's a lot to talk about. But you can't talk about American leadership until you talk about restoring and maintaining citizenship. If you don't understand who you are and what you believe, and you don't educate that in every generation, then you can forget about attempting to be the leader in the world or attempting to project power in controversial and difficult places. You need to shore up, you might say, the home front first. See, what is a good citizen? It's not just voting or jury duty. It's not protesting necessarily. I mean, those are all ingredients of what we do in republics, of what citizens do. Of course, voting and all those things are good. But Roosevelt points out that it's the gritty, homely virtues, the civic virtues. He uses the word efficient, which is usually a word we think of when we think of light bulbs and starting pitchers. You don't think of it when you think of citizens. Because his view of citizenship is first inward. Who are you as an individual, and what do you do before deciding how others ought live? And he uses, the first principle is work. earn success, the willingness to keep a job and provide for your family. The second is fight, a strong and virile people, he says, a masculine spirit for men and women, strength, vigor, and power, holding your own. You see, we're a bike helmet culture when we should be thinking about the barbarism of female subjugation in the Middle East. We teach our kids to be wimps. We turn our men into women and our women into men. And we need to be willing to stand up for and fight for the things that we believe in, whether it's on a battlefield or here at home. The third ingredient he talks about is large patriotic families, demographics. Roosevelt wrote a lot about demographics and talked a lot about demographics in this speech. The anecdote I use often is of an Afghan interpreter that I spent time with in Afghanistan. Not a radical, young kid. He's in the United States today. He would risk his life for me, and I would for him. And we were talking about faith, religion, Christianity, Islam, and he said, "Pete, it is inevitable that Islam will rule the world. The prophet foretold it. We're having 10 kids and you're having one." And there was powerful poignance in that phrase. And when you look at Western Europe today, when you look at, I mentioned they're gutting their militaries to pay for their welfare states. Well, when you forget who you are and you don't demand at some level allegiance and assimilation from populations that separate themselves and then have 10 kids while you're having one, that's how London becomes, the most popular name in London becomes Muhammad for newborn boys. And for us to think that things like that just go away is willful blindness. And so Western Europe, whether it's 25, 50, 75 years from now, is going to look very different. And that's not an anti-Muslim phrase or statement. It's a reality that because they don't do integration, because they haven't done that well in Western Europe, they're not the melting pot that America has been so far, they're going to have massive cultural clashes, as we have already seen. And then things like the migrant crisis only accelerate problems we see there. As many of you know, Europe in some ways is a preview, or could be a preview, of America. And the second chapter of the book is about France and what we can learn from France, that was a, frankly, formerly great republic that decided to give away its status by making very intentional decisions at home. And America can learn from that. Now, we have massive advantages in that our revolution was very different than theirs, but there's still a lot to learn. The fourth aspect, which you could put first in good citizenship, is character. Whether it's faith or believing in something greater than yourself. George Washington said in his first inaugural, religion and morality are indispensable supports of a republic. Rip out faith, and then you wonder why we get what we get in our culture today. I'm not talking about social conservatism, and in the book, I as a former ardent, I still am a social conservative in many ways, but a former ardent social conservative on campus in college. You go to war, you learn some things, you see some things, and you realize there's other things in my mind that are a more important priority. I'm not talking about pro-life issues. I think that's a fight that conservatives should continue to fight and win every day of the week. But I think we obsess over things like same-sex marriage, and it inhibits our ability to talk about the real challenges facing families, the real challenges facing parents and kids in our culture. Then he talks about, after you focus on yourself, looking outward, and he talks a lot about equal opportunity, which needs to be the lodestar of conservatives and Republicans. The left, of course, is the party of equal outcome. If we are not the strident, we don't strive daily to be the party of equal opportunity, then we will miss the mark. And I think it's fair to say Republicans and conservatives have, in many ways, missed the mark on that for a long time. Talking about things like marginal tax rates when people's mindsets are very different and they're seeing these massive shifts in our economy and the way their lives are lived. We have to have clear eyes about attacking that and approaching that. And that means not just unburdening regulations and problems for those that are pushing back against dependency for those at the bottom, but also making sure those at the top play by the same rules. It's the regulations, it's the tax code, it's the lobbyists that, of course, rig the system so that that those at the top are able to game it to their advantage and in many ways block out those who would otherwise have social mobility. The left talks about income inequality all the time. What we should talk about is social mobility, is the ability to rise, the ability in this country to have every opportunity that your parents or others had in previous generations. So you have to start with citizenship. He also talks about what undercuts good citizens, and it's a citizenry focused on rights instead of duties. citizenry that believes that man is perfected or perfectible, and therefore you lunge for utopia and utopian ideas. Citizenship that is invested in moral relativism, that there is no right or wrong. Of course, we see that on the battlefield today. Take, for example, something like the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, which was terrible, but there's no reason why the New York Times had to put it on the front page 32 straight days in a row. There is no home team in America, in many ways, the American press or other places today, because it's passé to say that America is good, or passé to say that I'm an American and therefore I support the causes that we undertake, even if they're difficult ones, and in many ways often controversial and open to dissent. And the fourth is class warfare. And Roosevelt talks about, he says that the end of the republic is at hand when class warfare commences, which is what we've seen in many ways, whether it's left, right, black, white, male, female, young, old. We've seen classes and genders pitted against each other in this nation over the last 7 years, which is toxic to the body politic and to citizenship. So you start with citizenship because without citizenship, you can't create the good patriots or be the good patriots on the world stage that you need to be. You guys have all seen the I don't know if you've seen the bumper sticker, think globally, act locally. It's a popular environmental bumper sticker, and I think Roosevelt would rip that off and say, think globally, think locally, act globally, meaning remember who you are and be willing to act globally in defense of those principles which are indispensable. That America is good, America is worth fighting for, America is truly exceptional, and America has been a force for good in the world. And, oh, by the way, winning the wars that we fight is a good thing. Roosevelt talks about that in the speech. Are we a people willing and able to prevail? It sounds like a basic, simple question, but there are critical moments, and I write in the book about Iraq in 2005 and 2006 when I was there, and then the Iraq surge in 2007 and 2008, and I see some people here who were a part of Vets for Freedom. The line of freedom and tyranny is oftentimes decided in those really difficult moments when half the country or a lot of people want to take a political expedient route and say, let's set a timeline for the war, it's been difficult, it's been controversial, it's been costly, let's pop smoke and leave this difficult battlefield. And then the other half says, no, this is the exact moment when you need to be willing to double down, when you need to be willing to take the fight to the enemy. And I've never been more proud, as I write in the book, than on January 10th, 2007, when George W. Bush announced the surge in Iraq. And did the right thing in the face of massive public pressure, doubled down to defeat a vicious enemy. He said, the future of our security depends on the battle in the streets of Baghdad. And ask yourself today if he was right. And unfortunately, of course, he was. And the surge did work, and it was successful, and al-Qaeda in Iraq was largely defeated. Political progress was happening. By February of 2010, Joe Biden was declaring Iraq a great achievement of the Obama administration. Such a great achievement that he just happened to visit again 4 or 5 days ago with political chaos unfolding. You see, they took for granted the stability and the gains that were made through gritty decisions in a dark moment and assumed they would perpetuate themselves without understanding how central defeating Islamists in Iraq was to their narrative and our narrative. Are we the paper tiger that Osama bin Laden said we were? Will we retreat from every difficult conflict if we're scuffed up? Or are we able to show the resolve of our forefathers and win the wars that we fight? And that's not a call for endless nation building or fighting every boogeyman on the horizon. It's a recognition that the lesson we should learn from the last 15 years, the lesson we should learn from Iraq, is that resolve works. Not that all these Middle Eastern wars are terrible and you know, we just not get messed up there. Let's nation build at home, Fortress America. That's it. We should, and the difficult part is, of course, the narrative in the Republican and the Democrat Party in many ways is moving in the wrong direction, to just unlearn everything we learned in those conflicts. And what I basically do over a couple of chapters in the book is make the case that the Iraq War is a war we should learn from about what to do in the right moments as opposed to run from. And I think Republicans and conservatives should stand confidently in every forum they can and point across the aisle to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and say, you're the reason ISIS has proliferated in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was American retreat that created those seeds, and it was your policies that advanced chaos in the region. And there's obviously it's a more complex situation when you unfold every layer of that, but ultimately it was a lack of military will and a lack of political engagement. We simply decided that we were over Iraq. And that's because today we have, as Roosevelt warns about in his speech, the first president of the United States who considers himself first a citizen of the world. And Roosevelt talked about that in 1910, warning against those who see themselves first as citizens of the world, whose international feeling for humanity swamps national feeling. In fact, he said the citizens of the world are usually the worst citizens of their own country because they point out at humanity and the amorphous things that we can do for them without focusing on what makes, in the Republic's case, their country great and why it's worth fighting for. I call his foreign policy, Barack Obama's, a coexist foreign policy. Another bumper sticker, you guys have seen that coexist bumper. Does it make you throw up in your mouth a little bit too when you see it? Yeah. That is an example of his mindset. It's not that coexisting is bad. Coexisting is good. But coexisting is a means, not an ends. Just like engagement is a means, not an ends. But for this administration, when asked about his doctrine, he said it is to engage. Engaging is not a doctrine. Engaging doesn't mean you necessarily understand who you are or what you believe in. And so what you have is a series of progressive elites who went to school at places like Princeton and Harvard, and a lot of us know a lot of little Obamas, wonderful people, but big believers in the state, big believers in humanity and what we can accomplish if we just build another international institution. Except then they're eventually forced to emerge from their utopian ideological cocoons, from their safe spaces and from their trigger warnings and from their solidarity marches. And what happens when the world still doesn't want to coexist with a leader as progressive and culturally sensitive as Obama? What if ISIS, instead of wanting to coexist, is chopping off the heads of Christians? Or Iran, instead of wanting to honor this deal, is cheating on it and will soon have a bomb just like North Korea did after that deal? Or what about when the Islamic State is pushing gay men off of a building, off a 5-story building in Iraq the same day that the White House is lighting up the White House in the hues of the rainbow in solidarity? What if they don't want to coexist? What if instead of hitting a reset button, the dictator in Russia is redrawing the lines in Eastern Europe? At that point, their mind reads, does not compute. Because they're not on campus anymore in the graduate student lounge. They're the commander-in-chief. And the things that they learned on campus that were supposed to lead to a perpetual peace, well, it turns out the bad guys in this world with very different ideologies aren't interested in coexisting or engaging on those levels. Rather than calling out real threats and abject evil, or heaven forbid, confronting them, the left, Obama, Clinton, Kerry, and others, they look around for the mutual understanding mediation groups or global climate change solidarity marches they so eagerly and self-righteously facilitated as graduate students, except they don't work. They seek the impossible global consensus. They work for peace agreements that have no attachment to military realities on the ground. They declare the need to negotiate without preconditions. They unilaterally withdraw from wars without caring what happens. Just end that war. They dismiss growing threats as the JV and unilaterally declare no boots on the ground. They apologize profusely for past sins. They send non-lethal aid when it's the lethal stuff that's actually needed. They seek the moral high ground by leading from behind, and they declare the use of violence, of course, just so 19th century. They try to coexist with a dangerous, fallen, backward world, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't work. So the result over the last 7 years, what do we get? Is an incoherent maze of interventions, non-interventions, surges and withdrawals, negotiations, high-stake raids, and it's utterly incoherent and unknowable because they don't understand, because America's leadership doesn't believe in America and doesn't believe in the use of American power as a tool for freedom and security in the world. We get incoherence like the bin Laden raid and then the Bo Bergdahl swap. We get a White House that the world simply doesn't recognize. So as good patriots after 7 years of Obama, what do we need to do? We need to unapologetically lead. Be willing to acknowledge that without America, there is no leader of the free world. And again, it doesn't mean we have to be the policeman in every corner, but we'd better be the world's sheriff. with a big shiny badge, willing to say our security and our interests are important to us, and when our word matters, and we will back up our allies and we will stand up to our enemies. We need to be willing to crush the Islamic State and unleash hell on them by loosening rules of engagement and recognizing that they're a vicious enemy, that the longer they exist, the longer that black flag flies, the more vulnerable we are on every front. We need to stand by dissidents in the world who still speak for freedom, who we've utterly abandoned. And as I talked about before, we need to be resolute and willing to talk about things like the Iraq War. And the book talks about comparing Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya. I didn't serve in Libya, but followed it very closely. And I went to Afghanistan wanting to believe that we could surge there the way we did in Iraq and see a different outcome. The reality is Afghanistan is biblical times with AK-47s. And what you can accomplish in Afghanistan is very different from what you can accomplish in Iraq. Of course, this administration cynically told us that was the good war, and then surged there never actually believing in that cause. You read the memoirs of secretaries of defense, they were never invested there, which is a moral sin, to send men and women to a battlefront you never ever believed in and were never invested in, and never sent the amount of troops your commanders wanted. And of course, when you gave the speech about that war, you told the enemy when you were going to leave the minute you did. It would be a joke, but it's not funny. And that's the problem. The problem is we also have an electorate today seduced by the ideas that American disengagement is what's necessary. So I try to take on some of the trends today on national security and foreign policy and explain why, as practitioners of the 9/11 generation, of course, there's difference of opinions across the spectrum. There's a reason to be proud of what was accomplished, even if today the outcomes are worse than murky in many places. I want to close by saying I used to say, as it pertains to the book and everything else, that I fought so that my kids don't have to, that I put on the uniform or carried a rifle so that my kids never would. That's just not true, and I don't say it anymore. I serve knowing that my kids will have to as well. And maybe they'll carry a rifle, or maybe they'll carry a balance sheet of a capitalist or a patriotic reporter or whatever it is. But every single generation is going to have to contribute to this generation at every turn. We are not cogs in an American empire. We are called to be engaged, good citizens in an ongoing experiment. We literally stand at the doorstep, at the footmat of another Woodrow Wilson, who Teddy Roosevelt famously tangled with, a man who said on multiple occasions and was derided for saying he was too proud to fight vicious enemies in the world. Of course, Obama emanates the exact same sentiment today. Teddy Roosevelt, when he was agitating for American involvement in World War I, a friend called him the bugle that woke America. In fact, he tried to lead the Roosevelt Division, actually, to World War I, which ultimately never happened, but he wanted to lead from the front again. We must be awoken again today. Our kids in educational institutions, our families, to how critical that incubating capacity is, to, as I said, our educational institute. And I have a policy chapter in the back of the book that talks about simple recommendations. It's not meant to be a conservative carte blanche. I didn't write about every issue, but I wrote about citizenship, equal opportunity, and American leadership, and 5 simple things in each category that I think would go a long way in trying to restore some of those things in our country. So I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank all of you for being in the arena in different capacities. I look out here and I see people engaged in this town, fighting for the things that America represents. It is a difficult fight these days. It can be a demoralizing fight these days, and a lot of uncertainty ahead. But I would encourage you to go back to founding documents, go back to historical speeches like this, to be reminded of what our country represents, of the types of men and women that have perpetuated it, who've had courage to do difficult things in difficult times. So before you read the book, maybe you want to go to the back of it and read the speech. It's reprinted in the book itself so that you can make your own judgments about the speech. But a trigger warning, it might urge you to actually enter the arena if you are not already. Thank you. Any questions, friendly or otherwise? Yes, ma'am.
If you're permitted to, thank you very much. If you're permitted to answer a question like this, I was wondering if you could give us some ideas of your thoughts about Donald Trump's insistence that the war in Iraq was a mistake. Are you able to comment on that?
Sure. I've commented about it on national television many times, so I'll repeat what I said there. No, I take issue with his characterization of the Iraq War. I think that in this book, in fact, many ways is a pushback against that narrative. I don't think we should be falling in with the Code Pink, MoveOn.org narrative of the war, which is what it is. And I think it may feel politically expedient to answer that way to begin with, but I think it's much more politically powerful and principled to argue that, hey, even if you didn't like how we got into the war, ultimately finishing it properly is really important and has massive implications. And that George W. Bush surged and had a successful strategy, and this president gave it away. So if you want to look at the carnage of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, point to the abandonment of Iraq and the abandonment of a red line in Syria, and that hangs on the neck of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. So it was interesting. This campaign in Iraq has been difficult to litigate for a lot of people. I mean, Jeb Bush, it took him a week to kind of figure out where he wanted to be on that issue. There have been very few moments when I've been proud of Republicans on their articulation of Iraq. I really can almost only think of one. I mean, Marco Rubio was asked about it, and he said it was not a mistake. Iraq was not a mistake. And I remember just sitting there saying, finally, at least somebody won't cave into, I think, that narrative. So hopefully the reality is that whoever the next commander-in-chief is, were it to be a Republican, whether it's Trump or Cruz, is willing to truly unleash total war on the Islamic State. And so what I do take issue with is the way people characterize Ted Cruz and Donald Trump's, whether it's carpet bombing or the willingness to handcuff the enemy, is their focus is on doing whatever it takes to destroy the Islamic State, not we want to find a way to kill civilians. So carpet bombing is not target civilians. Carpet bombing is if we know where the headquarters of ISIS is in Raqqa, then we're going to bomb it, even if there happen to be some homes nearby. Or when we're looking at the fuel trucks leaving to head to Turkey to sell on the black market, we're not going to bomb them with leaflets because we think the drivers are civilian casualties. We're going to bomb the oil trucks. So I think it's a difference of disposition, for sure. Mr. Sean Riley. Right there in the back, sorry.
How you doing?
Doing all right.
Good. So, question about you talked about the social issues, and you said that on some of them maybe there's some kind of obsession, and I don't completely disagree with that. I think that in a lot of ways the same-sex marriage has been fought, and it's kind of water under the bridge in a certain sense. But then you mentioned the illumination of the White House, right, with the colors, and I think that there's a certain sense in which a lot of the rest of the world does not agree. There's a lot of the world that does not agree with the United States on that issue. And then when they look at the way that is being litigated in the courts and the lack of magnanimity of the victors in those struggles, they're motivated to push back against us. And when our foreign policy looks like we're going to be promoting those sorts of things against their will, it seems like we can't ignore the social issues here at home, especially when in the light of that kind of foreign policy.
That's a really good point. Well, I also would note the hypocrisy of divesting from North Carolina but headquartering in everywhere else in the world where being a homosexual is illegal, right? Hypocrisy is rampant on issues like this. My argument is more about the amount of focus and energy that should go to it here at home. And I think to your opening statement, in many ways that issue was, whether you think it was lost or won, it was lost in the culture long before it was anywhere else. And so it almost feels like and is a dead horse that conservatives could be tempted to continue to beat, which prevents us from making far more but very legitimate arguments about, say, marital divorce rates with kids or this or out-of-wedlock births, things like that really should be a focus of tight-knit families and keeping them together. Instead, we're dismissed by, the media, the left, the everything as bigots and unable to make a lot of those core arguments that need to be made. But yeah, does that mean that's the way the whole world looks at that issue? Absolutely not. I mean, there are plenty of conservative quarters in this world who look at us and look at us sideways and say, and it just affirms for them, right, the absolute immorality of America that is totally decadent. And so that's a balance that has, I just don't think it's a point of emphasis at any level. I don't think we should be trying to make a big issue of it here, and I don't think we should be attempting to impose it on anywhere abroad as well. Mr. Nathaniel Hoops, who also was my bunkmate for 4 years at Princeton. We did sleep in bunk beds.
Thank you.
You like that intro,
Thank
Nat?
you for the book. I do like it. I thank you for the book. It's fantastic. Just talking about citizenship, I think one of the things that a lot of us, outside of the whole political fights that we continue to have on the role of government and the Iraq War and social issues and so forth, I think one of the things that probably a lot of us feel is troubled by the sense of breakdown of just overall social cohesion in the country, and whether it's too much time staring at the phones rather than talking to your neighbors, or whether it's just like the sense in the schools that there isn't the kind of citizenship isn't being taught in the way it should. And citizenship, sometimes, like you say, it's more than just voting or basics. But it's also about just engaging with the broader community in a way that says, I care about my community. Like I care enough to want to know my neighbors, right? And I guess one of the powerful things that I'd love to hear you boys, like, what got you inspired to talk to about citizenship with where you grew up in Minnesota?
Yeah, no. As I was writing and researching and thinking about this, I've never thought of my parents as inherently political or politically involved. In fact, they weren't partisan. We didn't talk about the Republican Party or Democrats in high school. I mean, frankly, in college was the first time I was really introduced to ideologies and perspectives in a meaningful way. But when I started researching and reading the speech and looking into it, I started to realize what good citizens my parents really were. They always worked hard, never asked for handouts, never made excuses. My mom watchdogged the PTA, was in the PTA and watchdogged the local curriculum, which really embarrassed me as a kid because, I couldn't go to certain things at certain times, but it's because she was paying attention to what was being taught in the classrooms. I don't, in the book, I don't impugn small families. I just make the case for large patriotic families because I think that's a good thing. And they raised a family full of boys that they told to be competitive and go out there and dust it off and love your country. And I wasn't from a military family. I absorbed a lot of that from just basic civic rituals of going to the Memorial Day parade in Wanamingo, Minnesota every Memorial Day and watching the vets walk down the wide Main Street. You watch the World War II guys, their uniforms don't fit anymore. I get the chills just thinking about it. And the Korean War vets, and then the Vietnam vets, and then the Gulf War guys. And because it's a town of 500 in southern Minnesota, the parade is like this long. But the whole city stands. The whole city is there. Everyone's saluting, clapping. And then, of course, it ends at Memorial Park down by the river because this isn't Veterans Day, it's Memorial Day, and we're memorializing those who gave their lives from this tiny little town in southern Minnesota, which could be replicated anywhere across all 50 states. And so they didn't sit there and preach or beat into me, read the Constitution. It was sort of, which is part of learning citizenship, by the way, but it was just sort of an infused sense of what it means to be a productive contributor to this country. And of course, the fourth ingredient that Roosevelt talks about is faith and character. And and as much as I may have wanted to rebel against it at many points in my life, which I write about, the reminder that there are things greater than you, that someone, in my case, died on a cross to redeem you for the sins that you will have in this world, was something that I carried with me and kept me humble and reminded me of who I was in this fallen world. Those are the way more important ingredients than sending our kids, making sure my kids get to go to Princeton or Harvard, which of course is wonderful and great opportunities and open tons of doors. But the more important piece is whether or not they come out of childhood and school and everywhere else as good citizens. So, and I'm from a public school. I went to public school all my life. I'm a big believer in public schools, but I worry that, I'm going to have to deconstruct 8 hours of every day they learn in school, something very different. And so we find a way to, pay a modest tuition to send them to Liberty Classical Academy, which is a little Christian classical academy up the road from us, and we drive them every day where they learn about patriotism and they learn about faith and they learn civics and they learn the classics. And they may not have a great basketball team, which I'm a little worried about, and football team. Liberty's not known for its gridiron skills, but I feel like they'll be infused. The world today is much different than the assumption that in small town forests like Minnesota, you're going to get infused with those community values the way that I was. And I think our educational systems and our culture and our media have been captured in so many places by moral relativism, by whether it's progressive elites with a very different view of what we should be emphasizing with our kids. I was even tempted not to include a whole lot about how do you infuse citizenship in a public school level, because it becomes so political about how you teach the founding documents, how you teach the founders. And in the world today where different people with different ideologies control that curriculum, you could see it descending quite quickly into a different narrative of citizenship and the Constitution. So my recommendation is founding documents, original documents. Talk about original documents. Talk about reading the Constitution, the Declaration, the Federalist Papers, things like that, and discussing those is a great place to start. I also talk about homeschooling. In fact, one of the recommendations here is making homeschooling more robust and possible. I mean, when I grew up, you met homeschool kids, you thought they were kind of weird, right? You're like, oh man, they're not socialized, what's going on? That's not the case. I mean, I know so many wonderful homeschool kids who are wonderfully grounded, wonderfully educated, and are amazing citizens in this country. And if the public schools are not an alternative because you feel like you're not being educated, your kids aren't being educated the way you want to, or you can't afford a private school, then we should make things like homeschooling more possible, easier, more streamlined as an option. And I think so. To me, it's there's a lot that goes into the education of the formal nature of citizenship, but it's more about trying to remind people. And what Roosevelt wrote about was sort of gritty, homely virtues of everyday life, which are not sexy and may not be cool on Facebook, but they're really important.
Thank you. Hey, Pete, I'm Peter Somerville. I work for the tech startup StreetShares, where we're crowdfunding business loans for the next generation of awesome veteran-owned small businesses. Kind of tailing off the last question about just how we influence culture. I remember when I was going through my Marine Corps training down in Quantico, I'd come up to the mall on the weekends, at the height of the Iraq War, and there was very little sense of public awareness of the veteran community. I mean, we're 40 years into an all volunteer military, which is great in many ways. But it seems like the families that I know, either there's no one who served in the military, or there's 10 cousin, aunt, uncle who served. And so how do we influence that culture to keep that sort of red-blooded Americanism alive?
Sure. One of the I'm not a fan of something like universal service, because I think it devolves into massive government growth, and eventually you're serving for things very disconnected from the original idea. But I do talk about a more robust sort of decision point through selective service. This idea that what if we made that little envelope you send back when you're 18 actually meaningful? So that at that point you're making a real decision about, hey, do I want to serve in the military? Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? And here's the benefits that would come from it. Bernie Sanders was running around talking about free college. Well, the military already gives away free college. There's plenty of ways you could incentivize, whether it's through hopefully simply through the tax code or through educational benefits or others, real service and investment, so that kids are making decisions, and then it's honored that, hey, wow, you took that step to be a part of the Minuteman Corps or something where maybe you're not in the military, but how many of us know people who are wonderful patriots who, if they could, would add themselves to a list and make sure they stay physically fit every year, and they could say, hey, I'm prepared to go if my country needs me. Sort of the next level, the step before the draft, right? I think a lot of people would do that, because they would feel skin in the game to say, hey, if that big moment comes, I'm ready to carry a rifle for my nation, or I'm ready to do this, or I'm ready to do that. I think there is an interim step there that would be a pretty interesting way to tie people a little bit more to service. But you talked about vets, which obviously is a passion of mine. A lot of people here from concerned vets. And a lot of what I talk about in the book, too, is the way that entrenched interests in Washington and entitled crony classes protect what they have and prevent any real meaningful change from happening. And of course, a lot of the work I've done and a lot of people here have done over the last 3 years is at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And there's no better example of that crony status quo than the VA. And the ongoing efforts of Concerned Vets for America, efforts that I was involved in, are met by a brick wall for those who are supposed to be for things that reform systems that are broken. And here we are 2 years after the scandal, and things are no better. In fact, many places they've gotten worse. Vets have a choice card, but they don't have any choice. No one's being held accountable at the VA, and who's stopping it? Well, the White House has no interest in this. It's been a political issue they've tried to prevent from the beginning. The VA is, of course, going to stifle reforms, and Bob McDonnell, while a nice guy, has been an utter failure as the VA secretary, has captured by the bureaucracy the minute he came in. You've got government unions. Someone tweeted at me last night that in here I talk about civil service reform. Well, you're damn right. In fact, it should be across government, but let's start at the VA and make sure that those who work in our government are held accountable. That if they're not doing a good job, they can be fired. That's a pretty basic principle. Accountability is how you change cultures, but government unions have a grip on that. And then it's special interests. And you want to talk about establishment this or establishment that. We hear that word a lot in the political spectrum. Special interests exist everywhere, including in the vet space. And it's traditional veteran service organizations here in Washington who are unwilling to change, who want to get invited to the White House cocktail parties and play nice with everybody at all times, that stifle things like basic choice, things like accountability, and then they impugn and attack their opponents at every turn because that's what the left does. They don't have an argument. It's always another $5 billion for the VA will fix it. Of course, it doesn't. And so what they do instead is they attack you personally. If you want some fun reading, read a 29-page document focused just on me by other organizations. Basically, it's a hit list of everything I've ever done in my life because they don't want to argue the merits of the issue or issue a report like we did at Concerned Vets that lays out what real reform would look like. They just want to attack the opponents and mischaracterize and say we just want to privatize it and shut it down. That's why things don't change, and it's hard to be a good citizen in that environment because it's easy to get along. And you can take that example throughout every spectrum of government and every level of government, and every place you're going to meet resistance. Every place there's going to be a critic. Every place you're going to fail, and you're going to fail again, and then you're going to fail again. And all they want you to do is quit. All they want you to do is quit at every level. The school board wants you to quit. The local government wants you to quit. The VA wants us to quit. Everybody wants us to quit because then we can all keep our jobs and everybody can live fat and happy and nothing will have to change. That's why people are ticked off in this country today. They're ticked off because nothing changes and everyone overpromises and then never delivers. And what this book, I hope, will help do is remind people that the fight is worth it, that you're never going to get it in the first try. You're never going to get it in the first month or the first year. It's never the first bill. It's going to have to be the sustained iteration of the truth of what works and then the advocacy behind it as individuals and organizations. And having the courage to believe in America, to believe in what it represents, not cower from those who have a new idea of what it means. And I think a document like Roosevelt's speech is a great pathway to remind us of that kind of thing.
All right, so let me just steal the last question. Yeah. Other than fixing the VA, what is the thing that we as citizens could or should be doing for our veterans, particularly as it attaches to that issue of citizenship?
I think the first thing is, and we've talked about it actually here in this auditorium once before, is recognizing and raising awareness about issues facing the veterans community without stigmatizing them. And making sure that we acknowledge challenges facing vets, but we don't create the caricature that they're ticking time bombs who are inevitably broken good and damaged goods. It's empowering them through any number of vehicles, through education, through opportunities, through small business financing. It's recognizing that these guys are going to be, guys and gals are going to be the future leaders of they're going to rebuild our country. They're going to rebuild our communities, our civic organizations, our schools. They're the core of people in America that understands what it means to serve something greater than themselves. They've also been in an arena that's highly controversial, in places that were very difficult, with a public that didn't quite support them the whole time. And they found a way to get it done. And frankly, get it done quite successfully. So I'm confident that them and their families and those who come around them are in some ways provide the nucleus of the types of folks that are going to get out there and make sure that the 21st century is an American century as well. Because it's not, and I used to say this on the Defend Freedom Tour for Concerned Vets all the time, it's not going to be your neighbor who's down in the basement playing Worlds of Warcraft and watching TMZ. they're not going to do it. They're literally not. They have no idea. They're sort of just existing in this country without a sense of where it comes from and why it matters. It's going to have to be those of us who do. And if we do so tepidly, or we do so saying, yeah, America's kind of good, but, then we're going to get steamrolled. And so if you don't educate and remind yourself what makes this place special and that our founders truly did something exceptional, then you will get steamrolled. And so education up front is the beginning, and then finding the courage and I think vets obviously have shown that courage in one capacity, and I think we'll lead the charge again.
So before I ask you to join with me in thanking the author of In the Arena, let me just say that there are books available outside, and Pete, you're going to stick around a bit, so Pete will stick around a bit if you'd like your book signed. Thank you again for coming, and please join me in thanking our author, Pete Hegseth.
Thank you.
Here's a look at some authors recently featured on Book TV's After